I used to believe that everything could be organized into neat categories, that with enough planning, patience, and attention to detail, life would eventually align itself into something predictable and calm. For a while, that belief seemed justified. My wedding had been the perfect example of control. Every detail was mapped out, every vendor confirmed, every color and texture carefully chosen. I had built something that felt stable, almost untouchable, like a small universe that would unfold exactly as I had imagined. Now there are only 14 days left, and that universe is slowly falling apart. The number itself feels unreal. 14 days is not enough time to fix anything, not enough time to rebuild what is unraveling, not enough time to breathe properly without feeling the weight of everything pressing down at once. Each morning begins with the same quiet awareness, a heavy stillness before thoughts begin to move, before the reality of the situation settles back into place. At first, the changes seemed manageable. A minor adjustment, a small inconvenience, nothing that could not be handled with a few emails and a steady voice. The kind of thing people reassure themselves about when they are trying not to panic. The flowers were no longer available, replaced by something different, something that did not match the image I had carried in my mind for months. It felt insignificant at first, like a single thread out of place in a much larger design. But the thread did not exist alone. It was connected to everything else. The venue followed, shifting in ways I had not prepared for. The space I had chosen so carefully, the one that had felt like the perfect setting, was suddenly no longer guaranteed in the way I had believed. Adjustments were suggested, alternatives offered, compromises introduced with polite language and careful explanations. Each suggestion carried the same quiet message that nothing was as fixed as I had thought. With every change, the structure I had built began to lose its shape. The certainty that had once felt solid started to dissolve into something uncertain and fragile. Plans that had once been clear became flexible, then unstable, then barely recognizable. The catering cancellation was the moment everything truly shifted. Until then, there had still been a sense that things could be corrected, rearranged, saved. That moment erased the illusion completely. It introduced a kind of silence that felt deeper than stress, something closer to disbelief. It was no longer about managing details. It was about accepting that the entire process was unpredictable. Sleep became difficult after that. Nights stretched longer, filled with thoughts that refused to settle. Every possibility seemed to lead to another problem, every solution revealed another gap. The mind searched for control and found none. It replayed scenarios, imagined outcomes, tried to reconstruct order where there was none left. Even the dress, the one element that had felt personal and certain, no longer fit in the way it was supposed to. Standing in front of a mirror, there was a strange disconnect between expectation and reality. The reflection did not match the image that had been carried for so long. It was a quiet reminder that nothing, not even the most carefully prepared detail, was immune to change. Days passed in a blur of adjustments. New arrangements replaced old ones. Decisions were made quickly, sometimes without the confidence that had once accompanied them. There was no longer time for perfection, only time for movement. Each choice felt less like a step toward a vision and more like an attempt to keep everything from collapsing completely. Somewhere in the middle of all of this, something subtle began to shift. The urgency remained, the pressure did not disappear, but the attachment to the original plan started to loosen. It did not happen suddenly. There was no clear moment when everything changed. It was more like a gradual release, a slow realization that holding onto the original version of the wedding was causing more strain than letting it go. The replacement flowers, brighter and less delicate than the originals, no longer felt like a loss. They were simply different. The new reception space, unfamiliar and not chosen with the same care, began to feel like a possibility rather than a compromise. The last-minute catering arrangement, unexpected and unplanned, introduced something new rather than something lacking. Each imperfection started to feel less like a failure and more like a variation. The idea of control, once so central, became less important. What mattered was no longer the exact shape of the day, but the fact that the day would still exist. The meaning of it had not changed, even if the details had. There was a quiet moment one evening, sitting among scattered decorations and half-finished arrangements, when everything felt strangely calm. The chaos had not disappeared, the problems were still there, but they no longer carried the same weight. They were part of the experience rather than obstacles to it. The expectation of perfection had been replaced by something more real. The wedding that was approaching was no longer the one that had been imagined months ago. It did not match the carefully constructed vision, did not follow the original plan, did not reflect the precise control that had once seemed so important. Instead, it had become something unpredictable, something shaped by circumstances rather than intention. And yet, it was still a wedding. It still carried the same purpose, the same meaning, the same quiet significance beneath all the shifting details. The changes had altered the surface, but they had not touched the core. 14 days became 13, then 12, each one moving forward regardless of preparation or readiness. Time continued in the same steady way, unaffected by stress or expectation. It moved without hesitation, without concern for plans or adjustments. The awareness of that movement brought a kind of clarity. There was no way to stop it, no way to return to the original version of events, no way to restore everything to the way it had been. There was only the present version, the one that existed now, incomplete and imperfect, but still real. The realization did not remove the stress entirely, but it softened it. It created space for something else, something quieter and more stable. A sense that the outcome did not need to be flawless to be meaningful. The wedding would not be perfect. It would be something else. Something shaped by change, by uncertainty, by unexpected turns and last-minute decisions. Something less controlled but more genuine. Something that reflected not just a plan, but an experience. And in that, there was a different kind of beauty. Not the polished, carefully designed kind, but something more human. Something that allowed for imperfection, for variation, for reality to exist without resistance. The days continued to pass, each one bringing new adjustments, new details, new moments of uncertainty. But they also brought a growing sense of acceptance, a quiet understanding that everything did not need to go according to plan in order to be right. The plan had changed, but the reason behind it had not. And that was enough. There was a time when I believed that control was the same thing as security. That if every detail was accounted for, if every possibility was anticipated, then nothing could truly go wrong. Now, standing so close to the day itself, I can see how fragile that belief really was. The closer the wedding gets, the less everything feels like a checklist, and the more it feels like a current pulling me forward. There is no pause button, no moment to step outside and reorganize everything from a distance. It is happening, whether I feel ready or not. In the past few days, the rhythm of my thoughts has changed. The panic that once came in sharp waves has softened into something quieter, more constant but less overwhelming. It is no longer a series of sudden crises but a steady awareness that things are unfinished, imperfect, and still moving. There are still problems. Small ones, unexpected ones, things that appear out of nowhere and demand attention at the worst possible moment. A delivery that arrives incomplete. A confirmation that was assumed but never actually secured. Tiny gaps in the plan that reveal themselves one by one, like cracks in a surface that once looked smooth. But the reaction to them is different now. Where there was once urgency, there is now a kind of measured response. Not calm exactly, but something close to it. A recognition that not everything needs to be solved perfectly, only sufficiently. That the goal is no longer to create something flawless, but to allow something real to exist. There is a strange freedom in that realization. It shows up in unexpected ways. In the way decisions are made more quickly, without endless reconsideration. In the way imperfections are noticed but not resisted. In the way the mind no longer tries to reconstruct the original vision every time something changes. The original vision is gone. And somehow, that is no longer a loss. There is a different kind of image forming now, less defined but more flexible. It does not exist as a fixed picture but as a series of moments that have not yet happened. It is not something to be controlled, but something to be experienced. The days are filled with movement. Errands, messages, adjustments, confirmations. A constant flow of activity that leaves little room for stillness. And yet, in between those moments, there are brief pauses where everything feels unexpectedly quiet. In those pauses, the weight of everything lifts slightly. There is a sense of being inside something larger than the details, something that continues regardless of whether every element is in place. A reminder that the event itself is not defined by its perfection, but by its meaning. It is a subtle shift, but a powerful one. The dress is still not exactly right, but it is closer. The flowers are still not what was originally planned, but they are arranged in a way that feels intentional. The venue, altered and unfamiliar, is starting to take shape in a way that no longer feels temporary. Nothing is exactly as it was supposed to be, but everything is becoming something else. There is a moment, late in the evening, when the house is finally quiet and the constant movement of the day comes to an end. The decorations are partially arranged, the lists are scattered, the plans are still incomplete. And yet, there is a sense of stillness that was not there before. It is not the stillness of completion, but the stillness of acceptance. A recognition that there is a limit to what can be controlled, and that beyond that limit, there is only trust. Not blind trust, not certainty, but a willingness to let things unfold without constant resistance. The mind, once focused on fixing everything, begins to shift toward observing. There is a difference between those two states. Fixing is urgent, tense, driven by the need to correct. Observing is quieter, more open, less attached to outcomes. It allows things to be seen as they are, rather than as they were supposed to be. This shift does not solve the problems, but it changes the experience of them. The wedding is no longer a project to be perfected, but a moment that is approaching. And that moment carries something deeper than all the details combined. The awareness of that depth begins to grow stronger as the days pass. It exists beneath the surface of everything else, steady and unchanged. It does not depend on flowers, or seating arrangements, or timing. It is not affected by cancellations or adjustments or unexpected changes. It is simply there. A quiet center in the middle of everything. There are still moments of doubt, brief flashes where the old patterns return, thoughts about what could go wrong, what is still missing, what is not as it should be. But they do not last as long as they once did. They rise, they move, and then they pass. In their place, something else remains. A sense of movement towards something meaningful, even if the path is not smooth. The countdown continues. 12 days, then 11, then 10. The numbers decrease, but the sense of urgency does not increase in the same way. It transforms instead, becoming less about preparation and more about presence. Each day feels more immediate, more real. There is less distance between now and the moment itself. And within that closeness, there is a growing clarity. The wedding is not a performance. It is not a display of perfection or a demonstration of control. It is not defined by how closely it matches an original plan. It is defined by something simpler, by the act of choosing, of committing, of stepping into something unknown with intention. That understanding changes everything. It removes the pressure to make everything look a certain way. It softens the need for approval, for validation, for everything to align perfectly. It brings the focus back to something that cannot be disrupted by external changes. Something internal. Something steady. The days continue to unfold, carrying both uncertainty and quiet moments of peace. The balance between them shifts constantly, never fully settling, but gradually leaning towards something more grounded. There is no final resolution. No moment where everything suddenly becomes perfect, but there is a growing sense that it does not need to. The imperfections remain, the changes stay, the unexpected continues to appear, and still, the movement forward does not stop. It leads, slowly but steadily, toward a day that is no longer defined by its plan, but by its presence, a day that will arrive exactly as it is, and that, finally, feels like enough. The final days begin to blur together in a way that feels both fast and strangely suspended. Time no longer moves in clear segments marked by tasks and accomplishments. Instead, it stretches and compresses unpredictably, one moment filled with urgency, the next with an unexpected stillness that feels almost unreal. There are moments now when everything seems almost normal, small pockets of time where the noise quiets, where the lists stop growing, where the weight of everything lifts just enough to breathe without thinking about what comes next. In those moments, there is a quiet awareness of how close everything is, not in a way that creates panic, but in a way that feels almost inevitable. The inevitability changes things. There is no longer the same impulse to resist what is happening. The mind does not try as hard to rewind, to reconstruct, to imagine a different version of events. That version no longer feels accessible. It belongs to a different point in time, to a version of myself that believed in a different kind of certainty. Now, the focus is narrower, more immediate, more real. The remaining preparations continue, but they no longer carry the same emotional charge. Tasks are completed because they need to be, not because they are part of a perfect vision. There is a simplicity in that approach, a directness that removes the extra layers of expectation. The details still matter, but they no longer define everything. There is a shift toward noticing what is actually present instead of what is missing. The way the light falls in the room where decorations are being arranged. The texture of fabric under careful hands. The quiet rhythm of movement as things are placed, adjusted, left as they are. These small observations create a sense of grounding. They pull attention away from the abstract idea of the wedding and bring it back to the physical reality of it. To what can be seen, touched, experienced in the moment. There is something calming about that. The mind, once so focused on outcomes, begins to settle into the process itself. And within that process, there is a subtle sense of connection that had been overshadowed before. It appears in quiet ways. In shared glances across a room filled with unfinished tasks. In the unspoken understanding that not everything needs to be said. In the presence of another person who is moving through the same experience, not as an observer, but as part of it. That presence becomes more noticeable as everything else becomes less controlled. It is steady in a way that nothing else is. While plans shift and details change, that remains constant. Unaffected. There is a moment, late at night, when everything is finally still. No messages, no calls, no decisions waiting to be made. Just silence, soft and uninterrupted. In that silence, the weight of the past weeks feels distant, as if it belongs to something that has already passed. The stress, the urgency, the endless adjustments, they are still part of the story, but they no longer dominate it. They have become background. What remains in the foreground is something quieter. A sense of arrival, not at the final moment, but at the understanding of it. The wedding is no longer something to be completed. It is something to be entered. That distinction becomes clearer with each passing day. There is no finish line to cross, no perfect state to achieve before it begins. There is only the movement toward it, the gradual unfolding of everything that has led to this point. And that unfolding does not require perfection. It does not demand that everything be resolved or aligned. It only requires presence. The awareness of that requirement brings a kind of peace that had been missing before. Not a dramatic peace, not something overwhelming, but something subtle and steady. A quiet acceptance of what is, without the need to reshape it. The final preparations continue, but they feel different now, lighter. Not because there is less to do, but because there is less resistance to what is being done. Each action feels more direct, more connected to the moment rather than to an imagined outcome. There is less hesitation, less second-guessing. Decisions are made and left as they are, without the need to revisit them repeatedly. The mind begins to trust the process, even if it does not fully understand it. That trust is fragile at times, easily disrupted by moments of doubt or flashes of old habits. But it returns more quickly than before, settling back into place with a quiet persistence. As the days narrow further, the sense of time changes again. It becomes more immediate, more tangible. There is no longer the feeling of something distant approaching. It is close now, almost within reach. The space between now and then is no longer abstract. It is measurable, visible in the rhythm of days and nights passing one after the other. And within that closeness, there is a growing clarity. The details that once seemed so important begin to fade slightly, not disappearing, but losing their central role. They are still there, still part of the experience, but they no longer define it. What defines it is something deeper. Something that has been there all along, beneath the layers of planning and expectation. A quiet certainty that does not depend on circumstances. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not demand attention. It simply exists, steady and unchanged, regardless of what shifts are on it. That certainty becomes easier to recognize as everything else becomes less rigid. It is present in moments of stillness, in the absence of urgency, in the quiet awareness that nothing more needs to be added for the moment to be enough. The wedding is no longer something to perfect. It is something that is already complete in its meaning, even if its form continues to change. That realization does not remove the final traces of stress, but it transforms them. They become part of the movement rather than obstacles to it. They are experienced, acknowledged, and allowed to pass without taking control. The final days arrive not with a dramatic shift, but with a gradual settling. Everything that could be done has been done, even if not in the way it was originally planned. Everything that remains unfinished is accepted as it is. There is no final moment of readiness. Only a quiet willingness. And in that willingness, there is a sense of alignment that had been missing before. Not alignment with a plan, but with the present moment. With what is real. With what is about to happen. The wedding stands just ahead, no longer as an ideal to be reached, but as a moment to be lived. And for the first time, that feels like exactly enough.